I never intended to become obsessed with old photographs of blimps. It started innocently enough, a casual search for early aviation history, the kind of research you do on a Sunday afternoon when you're curious about dirigibles and zeppelins. But within hours I stumbled onto something that made my stomach drop. Not one photograph, not two, but dozens. Hundreds, actually. Images from the 1880s through the early 1900s showing massive airships hovering near buildings under construction. Not passenger vessels, not military craft, something else entirely. And here's the strangest part. They were always positioned directly above unfinished structures. Cathedral spires, government buildings, exhibition halls. The blimps weren't transporting people or observing from a distance. They were engaged in construction itself. Cables descended from their gondolas, rigging systems connected to rooftops. Workers stood on scaffolding that seemed impossibly minimal for the weight it supposedly supported. The official explanation? Photography backdrops, promotional stunts, artistic composites. But that explanation collapses the moment you examine the photographs closely. Because these weren't staged promotional shots, they were documentary images captured by municipal photographers, archived in city records, published in engineering journals without fanfare or celebration. They showed blimps as ordinary tools of construction, as commonplace as cranes or pulleys. The captions were matter of fact. Installation of dome structure, June 1893. Positioning of bell tower elements, 1893. October 1887. No excitement, no novelty, just routine documentation of something everyone apparently understood. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I began collecting images systematically. Chicago, 1893, Berlin, 1889, Melbourne, 1888, St. Petersburg, 1891, Buenos Aires, 1895, San Francisco, 1896. Every major city, every continent, the same configuration, massive lighter-than-aircraft positioned above buildings during critical phases of construction. The coordination problem hit me first. How did cities across the globe, cities separated by oceans, by language barriers, by months of travel time, all adopt identical construction techniques at precisely the same moment in history? We're told these were independent developments, parallel innovations driven by the Industrial Revolution. But the photographic evidence shows something far more troubling. Perfect uniformity. The blimps were the same dimensions. The rigging systems used identical configurations. The positioning followed the same geometric principles whether you were in Prague or Philadelphia. Not similar, identical. As if they were following instructions they didn't fully understand. As if they'd inherited a technology without comprehending its origins. I started asking questions that researchers apparently weren't supposed to ask. Where did these airships come from? Who manufactured them? What propulsion systems kept them stable during precision lifting operations? How did they achieve the lift capacity necessary to position multi-ton architectural elements with surgical accuracy? The silence was deafening. Engineering journals from the period mention the blimps in passing, the way you'd reference a hammer or a wheelbarrow. But they never explain the technology, never describe the manufacturing process, never discuss improvements or innovations. The airships simply exist, fully formed in 1880s records. And then, after 1912, they vanished just as abruptly. No transition period, no debate about abandoning such valuable equipment. Just silence. This raises a simple but critical question. What were they lifting? I examined the structures themselves. The buildings that appear in these photographs weren't modest constructions. They were architectural marvels. The Chicago World's Fair buildings, the Budapest Parliament, the Vienna State Opera, massive domes that required precise placement, bell towers with tolerances measured in millimeters, ornamental elements weighing dozens of tons. The deeper I went, the more impossible the official story became. Consider the mechanics. A conventional crane uses counterweights, leverage, mechanical advantage. But these blimps operated on entirely different principles. They provided vertical lift without ground-based support structures. They could position themselves with precision over any point of a building. They could hold massive weights suspended while workers secured them into place. And that's where the physics becomes impossible to ignore. Modern engineers will tell you that lighter-than aircraft lack the stability for precision construction work. Wind displacement, atmospheric pressure variations, thermal expansion of lifting gas, all of these factors make blimps unsuitable for delicate positioning tasks. Yet the photographic evidence shows them doing exactly that, holding cathedral domes steady in mid-air, supporting bridge segments, positioning clock tower mechanisms with clockwork precision. Either the photographs are fraudulent, all of them across multiple continents in multiple archives, or something's fundamentally wrong with our understanding of what was possible in the 1880s. If you're finding this investigation compelling, consider following this channel, because what I discovered next made everything else look tame by comparison. I avoided the Tartaria hypothesis for months. It seemed too convenient, too conspiratorial, but the evidence kept pushing me toward an uncomfortable conclusion. The architectural style in these photographs, the buildings being constructed with aerial assistance, they share unmistakable characteristics. Star forts, atmospheric power systems, harmonic resonance chambers, the same distinctive features appear in structures worldwide, all supposedly built independently, all during the same narrow window of time. These weren't just buildings, they were components of a larger system. Look at the basements, not simple foundations, but multi-level underground complexes, with sealed chambers and pressure vessels. Look at the towers, not decorative spires, but antenna-like structures with metallic elements and specific geometric proportions. Look at the domes, not mere architectural flourishes, but carefully engineered acoustic chambers. The buildings themselves suggest a technology we've forgotten how to recognize, a technology for capturing, storing, and distributing energy through architectural resonance. And the blimps, they may have been the installation system, the tools used to position these energetic components with the precision necessary for the network to function. Ask yourself, why would you need aerial positioning for structures that could theoretically be built from the ground up, using scaffolding and cranes? Unless the buildings weren't being constructed from the ground up, unless they required specific orientation, specific altitude placement, specific harmonic alignment that ground-based methods couldn't achieve, unless you were assembling a machine, not erecting a building. I started examining construction photographs more carefully. Not just the blimps, but the buildings themselves mid-construction. Here's what troubled me. The structures in these images show no evidence of progressive construction. No partially completed walls, no visible timber framing, no brick-by-brick assembly. Instead, we see complete sections, entire floors, whole wings, massive dome segments appearing as unified elements being positioned from above. The pattern repeats across cities. Massive prefabricated components lowered into place by aerial craft, but prefabricated where? With what manufacturing capability? Using what transportation network to move multi-ton architectural elements across continents? The official records remain silent. I found shipping manifests that listed architectural elements and structural components arriving at ports worldwide during the 1880s. But the manifests never specify origin points, never name manufacturers, never explain how such massive, precisely engineered pieces were produced in an era supposedly limited to hand tools and steam power. Not decades of slow construction, not traditional masonry techniques, not gradual assembly, but complete architectural elements arriving fully formed and positioned from the sky. This is where the investigation becomes truly unsettling. I searched for engineering specifications, construction manuals, technical documentation, explaining how these aerial construction systems functioned. I found nothing. Not incomplete records, not fragmentary evidence, but absolute absence, as if someone had systematically removed every reference to the technology. Construction journals from the 1880s discuss conventional building methods in exhaustive detail: brick laying techniques, mortar composition, timber joints. But when it comes to the aerial positioning systems visible in thousands of photographs, complete silence. The journals act as if the blimps don't exist, even while municipal archives document their constant presence. Libraries remove sections, archives reclassified documents as lost. Engineering schools stopped teaching courses that appeared in the 1880s catalogues but left no textbooks, no lecture notes, no student records. The deeper I looked, the more obvious the erasure became. And here's the most disturbing part. This wasn't gradual obsolescence, this was systematic removal. Patents related to aerial construction filed between 1880 and 1910 were either destroyed in fires or reclassified under national security restrictions that remain active today. Photographs in city archives show damage, not water damage, not slow deterioration, not accidental harm, but deliberate defacement. Specifically, the sections showing rigging systems and attachment mechanisms were scratched out, burned away, removed with precision. Someone didn't want us to understand how these systems worked. As we continue examining this mystery, the implications only grow more staggering. Stay with me. Let me state this plainly. What I'm describing couldn't have happened through independent development. Buenos Aires in 1895 used the exact same aerial positioning technique as St. Petersburg in 1891. The cable configurations were identical. The attachment points on buildings followed the same geometric principles. The blimps maintained the same relative position during installation procedures. How? Communication in the 1890s was primitive. Telegraph could transmit text, not technical drawings. Photography required weeks to ship internationally. Engineering schools were regional, isolated, competitive. Yet somehow construction crews on different continents were implementing identical techniques with perfect synchronization. Unless they weren't inventing these methods, unless they were following existing templates, unless the technology predated the supposed age of innovation. The Tartaria hypothesis suggests these weren't new constructions at all. These were renovations, repairs to damaged infrastructure from an earlier civilization. The blimps weren't innovative tools, they were inherited technology, perhaps the last functional remnants of a more advanced aerial network. That would explain the perfection, the lack of developmental stages, the absence of failed experiments and gradual improvements. You don't see progression because there was no invention, only rediscovery, only maintenance of systems already in place. After 1910, everything changes. The blimps vanish from construction photographs, not gradually, not through technological replacement, but instantly. Cities that documented aerial construction for 3 decades suddenly stop. Records that mention atmospheric lifting systems fall silent. New construction projects use conventional methods despite having previously relied on aerial positioning for identical structures. Why would you abandon superior technology? The official explanation points to the Hindenburg disaster of 1937, claiming it ended the dirigible era. But that disaster occurred 25 years after aerial construction had already ceased. Besides, these weren't hydrogen passenger ships prone to combustion. The construction craft in 1880s photographs operated on different principles entirely. Something forced the abandonment, something deliberate. I found fragments of municipal meetings from 1911 and 1912 where city councils discussed atmospheric safety concerns and unauthorized aerial operations. The language was deliberately vague, never specifying what threats existed. But the resolutions were clear. Cease all aerial construction immediately. Ground existing craft. Remove related equipment from public buildings. By 1913, the network was dead. The buildings remained, the cathedrals, the government halls, the exhibition centres, but their original purpose was forgotten. Their energetic functions were disabled. Their connections to the larger atmospheric network were severed, and within a generation, people looked at these structures and saw only beautiful architecture, never understanding they were looking at the components of a planetary system. When you examine the evidence without prejudice, when you set aside the comfortable narratives we've been taught, a darker picture emerges. These weren't primitive people struggling to master flight. These were inheritors of technology they didn't fully comprehend. The blimps existed because someone built them before 1880. The architectural network existed because someone designed it as a unified system. The global coordination existed because someone established it before the modern era began. And then something ended it, deliberately, systematically, globally. The photographic record shows the technology existed. The architectural evidence shows the buildings were designed as energetic systems. The documentation gaps show someone actively erased the knowledge. The sudden abandonment shows coordinated suppression. Ask yourself, who benefits from forgetting? Who gains from convincing entire civilizations they invented everything from scratch? Who profits when we believe we're at the pinnacle of technological achievement, rather than struggling to reclaim lost knowledge? I've stood inside these structures now, not as a tourist, but as someone looking for evidence of their original function. The acoustic properties are impossible. Sound resonates in patterns that shouldn't exist in decorative architecture. Certain frequencies amplify while others cancel completely. The geometric proportions create standing waves that persist for minutes after sound sources cease. The basement chambers contain sealed vessels connected to nothing, serving no apparent purpose, except the vessels are precisely tuned to atmospheric pressure variations. They respond to barometric changes with mathematical precision, as if they were designed to capture energy from atmospheric dynamics. The towers contain metallic elements positioned at specific intervals along their height. Not lightning rods, not decorative elements, but precisely spaced conductive materials that create electromagnetic gradients when atmospheric conditions are right. These buildings weren't monuments to human achievement, they were machines. And the blimps were how you assembled machines whose components weighed tons and required precise three-dimensional positioning. Once you see them as technology rather than architecture, everything makes sense. The global coordination, the identical designs, the careful documentation followed by systematic erasure, the sudden abandonment. You don't abandon functional technology unless someone makes you. What were these buildings really powering? The atmospheric network, the resonance chambers, the pressure vessels, what were they designed to do? Generate electricity, wireless energy transmission, weather modification, consciousness amplification? The answer may lie in what happened after 1912, not just the cessation of aerial construction, but changes in atmospheric phenomenon worldwide, shifts in weather patterns, reduction in documented ball lightning events, changes in the behavior of natural electrical phenomena, as if removing nodes from a network altered the system's entire operation. And who ordered the shutdown? What authority commanded cities across every continent to simultaneously abandon technology they'd relied on for decades? What force possessed the reach and power to coordinate such global suppression? These questions haunt me because the evidence suggests the erasure is ongoing. Photographs continue to disappear from archives. Digital copies corrupt mysteriously. Researchers who probe too deeply lose funding or face academic exile. The mechanisms of forgetting are still active, still protecting something. We live among these buildings daily. We admire their beauty, photograph their facades, hold ceremonies in their chambers, and we never ask why they're so overbuilt, so precisely engineered, so mathematically perfect. We accept the official story that primitive people using hand tools somehow constructed architectural marvels that modern engineering struggles to replicate. We don't question the coordination problem. We don't notice the missing documentation. We don't wonder about the blimps in 1,000 photographs hovering like mechanical angels above structures being assembled from the sky. The deeper truth is more unsettling than simple conspiracy. We're not just ignorant of our technological past, we've been trained to not look, conditioned to accept impossibilities as historical fact, taught that questioning the narrative makes you a fool rather than an investigator. But the buildings remain, the photographs survive, the physical evidence persists despite every attempt at erasure, and somewhere, in sealed archives and classified documents, in family collections and forgotten municipal records, the full documentation of Tartaria's sky network still exists, waiting for someone brave enough to assemble the pieces, patient enough to trace the patterns, stubborn enough to ask the forbidden question, what if we didn't invent civilization? What if we inherited it, partially destroyed it, and then pretended we built it ourselves? The evidence suggests something much larger than historical revision. It suggests a technology deliberately forgotten, a network systematically disabled, a civilization erased so thoroughly that questioning its existence marks you as irrational. But when you stand beneath these impossible buildings, when you examine the photographs that weren't supposed to survive, when you trace the global pattern that official history claims is coincidence, you realize the truth has been here all along. We just stopped looking up.